If you were the king or the queen of the United States, what is the first thing that you would change? I was asked this question last year, and here's my answer. Hello, servus, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Feli. I'm originally from Munich, Germany, but I've been living here in Cincinnati, Ohio, on and off since 2016. And last year, my Patreon supporter Scott asked me a very interesting question. If you were the Queen of Germany, what is the first thing you would change? Same question for the USA. If Queen, what would you change first? I answered the first part of the question about what I would change in Germany in a video back in December. So if you haven't seen that yet and want to know what I'd like to change about my home country after living here in the US for 7 years, I'll link that video down below for you guys. But a lot of you also wanted to know what I, as a German, would change about the US. So here we go. Now, I know that this video will probably ruffle some feathers. I mean, every time that someone who moved here from another country voices criticism about the US, there are always a few comments saying, "Go back where you came from if you don't like it here. We don't care what foreigners think about our country. You weren't born here, so you don't get to talk shit about the US." It's usually considered more legitimate to criticize your own country, aka the country you were born and raised. And I get that. I mean, if you've seen a few of my videos, you probably know that there are a lot of things that I view critically about Germany. I mean, there's a reason why I currently live in the US. And if you want to know how I ended up here and why I like it here so much, I'd recommend checking out these videos. I'll link them all in the video description below. But after living here for over 7 years now, of course, I've also noticed things that I think could use some improvement. And since we're lucky enough to live in a free world with free speech, I am actually allowed to say that. In fact, within a democratic system, such as the US or Germany, it's even essential that citizens and residents engage in public debates and raise their voices when things go wrong. That's what democracy is based on. And while some people think that criticizing your country means that you're not patriotic, I actually think that wanting your country to be the best version of itself, to constantly strive for improvement, and to live up to its fundamental values is as patriotic as it gets. With that being said, of course, this is all a completely hypothetical scenario. The US obviously doesn't have a queen that can just randomly change things. In reality, this would all be super complicated and complex. And before I dive in, please also keep in mind that the way that a country is set up is always the result of historical developments, of external circumstances, and differences in culture and mentality. There's a reason why things are different everywhere in the world, and differences are valid. They're not good or bad per se. But if you're interested in my perspective as someone who was born and raised in Germany and has lived in the US for the last few years, here are 5 things I would change about the US if I could. The very first thing I would change is the American healthcare system. Of course, the healthcare system in Germany isn't perfect by any means, but when I came here to the US, I was pretty shocked by how many people here don't have health insurance, often because they can't afford it. How many people have medical debt, yes, that's a commonly used phrase here, of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars just because they got sick or got in an accident. I was shocked when I found out that even when you do have health insurance, most people still have to pay thousands of dollars out of pocket every year, and that insurances don't work with every doctor, meaning that you can't just go to any hospital when you have an emergency, but you have to make sure that you go to one that is in network of your insurance, so one that your insurance has an agreement with. And it's super common here that people who are in a medical emergency either drive to the emergency room themselves, ask someone to drive them, or specifically say no when someone wants to call an ambulance for them because the ambulance ride alone would cost them $1,000 to $2,000. In some cases, even several thousand. It always depends on where you live and whether or not your insurance covers any of that, if you even have health insurance to begin with. Same goes for visits to the emergency room. Many people here try to avoid that at all costs because of how expensive it can get. Listen, that's something that you'd maybe expect in a so-called developing country, but not in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Of course, if you have money here, you don't have to worry about any of this. But should health really be a luxury good that only some have access to? I personally don't think so. I think access to healthcare is the baseline for a functioning society, the bare minimum. Unfortunately, this also affects the access to mental health care, which in my opinion is just as important as physical health care. I know people here who had to wait for over a year to get a therapist that accepted their insurance, and paying out of pocket is extremely expensive. That's why I think it's amazing that nowadays we have alternative options available, such as BetterHelp. They're sponsoring today's video, which I'm very happy about because I actually used BetterHelp back in 2020 during the pandemic to kind of work through some past experiences and phases of depression that I had gone through when I was getting my master's degree. And I loved how easy it was to sign up, fill out the questionnaire, and then be matched with a licensed therapist that I was able to talk to without even leaving the house. Which, well, in 2020 wasn't really an option anyway, but in general, that can be a huge threshold for many people who want to start therapy. Even just calling a therapist to make an appointment can seem completely overwhelming. Believe me, I know. But with BetterHelp, you can just message your therapist first if that's what you feel most comfortable with. But also sessions over the phone or a video call are available. That's what I did for the most part. So if you're currently struggling and think that therapy might help you, you can check out the link down below. That will even get you a 10% discount. And since BetterHelp isn't limited to the region you live in, you actually get access to over 30,000 therapists, which makes it a lot easier to find just the right match for you, and it gives you access to a much wider range of expertise. And if you feel like your therapist isn't the right fit for you yet, you can easily switch to someone else at no additional cost, which is huge because in my experience, that's one of the trickiest parts about starting therapy, to find the right therapist for you. And when finding them means that you have to run from practice to practice and go through this process of wait times and questionnaires over and over again, it can be very draining and discouraging. But with BetterHelp, you can do all of that from your phone or your laptop and schedule your therapy sessions whenever it fits in best for you. So if you think you might benefit from therapy as well, I can definitely recommend BetterHelp. You can click the link in the video description or visit betterhelp.com/Feli. That way you will get 10% off your first month, and it also supports my channel. So if I really were the queen of the US, I would make sure that the healthcare system is more accessible to every member of society, that money doesn't play a role in whether or not you call 911, and that there are price regulations in place because it's wild how much people are billed here.
So I had hernia surgery 1 month ago today, and we just got the hospital bill in the mail. Anesthesia, $6,437. Medical/surgical supplies and devices, $13,777.02. Operating room services,
$56,652.
Pharmacy, $2,641.90.
Yeah.
The recovery room, $6,000.
Are you kidding me, dude?
All of this for a grand total of $85,768.92.
Now, Abby's insurance got denied, so they subtracted $76,703. I'm so confused. How can they just take that much off because the insurance got denied?
That's because they're making up all these prices.
Comment down below if healthcare is free in your country, because we need to move.
Now, of course, healthcare isn't just completely free in other countries. You still pay for your health insurance in Germany, but then you don't really have to pay anything additionally. And even if you do, the prices are a lot more reasonable in Germany. I know because I'm not currently insured in Germany, but I still do most of my checkup appointments there, and I usually pay about 150 euros at the gynecologist for my yearly checkup, and about the same at the dentist, including x-rays and a cleaning. The prices in the US look a little different, as you just saw. When I had wrist surgery here 4 years ago, the bill was also over $50,000 for an outpatient surgery, so I didn't even stay the night in the hospital. I was just lucky that I had a German expat insurance that covered every last bit of this. Even giving birth in the US is expensive.
I know you only gave birth 30 minutes ago, but we have someone waiting on this room, so we gotta make this quick. Here is your bill for $10,000. No, that can't be right. It should only be like $2,000 to $3,000. I have health insurance and I chose this hospital because it's in network. See, honey, the hospital's in network, but the doctor who delivered your baby and the anesthesiologist were out of network doctors. So they're not covered by your insurance at all. What? No one told me this could happen. I don't know how I'm gonna pay for this.
Well,
well, you better scurry on back to work then, because your employer wasn't required to provide any maternity leave. And if you miss a day, you might lose your job and not be able to pay us. Congratulations on your new baby. No, sit down. It's okay. You should stay here for 3 days. We want to make sure everything is okay before you go home for your minimum 8 weeks of maternity leave. And don't worry, everything is paid by Sécurité Sociale, so you don't owe us any money at all. And actually, here is a check for almost $2,000 to make sure that you have everything that you need for your new baby.
This also applies to the price of medications, such as EpiPens, which are needed for allergic reactions, or insulin, which is essential for diabetics.
What's it like working in the American office? I think I'm done working here. I can't take the stress. Stress? What's stress? People call you asking you for help with their insulin pumps. You help them. They are grateful. They thank you. And that's all the job is. The worst ones are the rationing calls. What rationing calls? You know, when people can't afford enough insulin, so they call to ask what the minimum amount is they can take while still staying alive. But insulin's free. Or like maybe the cost of a Netflix subscription. How's cost a major issue? 1/4 of Americans are forced to ration insulin. They keep calling back, sometimes desperate. They want help, but we can't help them. And the worst bit is knowing why some of them stopped calling back.
I shortened these skits for you a little, but you can find them all linked down below. What was also weird for me when I first came here was that dental insurance isn't a standard part of your health insurance. So when your employer actually provides dental insurance as part of your work benefits, that's often considered a really good offer to Americans. And it's also not like wait times in the US are that much better than in countries with universal healthcare. In fact, the wait time for getting an appointment at a primary physician is actually shorter in most countries compared to the US, with about 4 days in Germany and 20 days in the US. But your wait time for an elective surgery appointment is a little shorter in the US. Now, of course, the healthcare system is a huge and very complex topic, and these were just a few of the things that stood out to me when I first came here. I'll make a dedicated video about this at some point. And obviously, there are also many positive aspects about the American healthcare system, like high quality of care and the country's leading role in medical research. But that doesn't really help a lot of people if they don't have access to medical care in the first place. I mean, the life expectancy in the US is significantly lower than in other wealthy countries. In 2022, it was 77.5 years in the US on average, and 82.2 years in comparable countries. We're gonna stay on the whole accessibility topic for a moment, because the second thing I would change about the US, if I could, would be the cost of education, and therefore access to education. Even after 7 years, it's wild to me that getting a bachelor's degree in the US costs about $20,000 a year on average, and over 40 million Americans have student loan debt that they're still paying off. Many people owe tens of thousands of dollars, often even over 100,000, that they have to start paying off as soon as they're out of college. Especially if you went to a private university where tuition can cost over $50,000 a year. Coming from a country where I paid a couple €100 in fees every year for my bachelor's degree at one of the most renowned universities in Germany, LMU in Munich, that's just mind-blowing to me. And it doesn't stop there. Even though college students already have to pay so much money in tuition fees, they're often required to buy books for their classes, and it's not uncommon for these books to cost over $100 each. On average, a first-year college student in the US pays over $1,000 for books and other school supplies. And that's not even including living expenses yet. Some universities here require their students to live on campus in a dorm and get a meal plan for the cafeterias, and that can also get really expensive. Now, in order to get your children to the point where they could even get accepted into a good college, a lot of American families also choose to send their kids to private schools before university, so K-12 as you say here, kindergarten through 12th grade. It always depends on where you live, of course, but in many areas, public schools here aren't exactly known for providing high-quality education, and some of them have a pretty rough reputation. And a private middle school or high school costs over $10,000 per year on average. Now, getting back to universities, of course, many people don't have to pay the full price due to scholarships and financial aid, but the cost of tuition for a 4-year college in the US has more than tripled over the last 60 years. In 1963, the average cost was only around $5,000 a year, and that's already accounting for for inflation. So they converted this to the dollar amount from 2021, if that makes sense. There's no currency conversion necessary here. Meanwhile, in 2021, the average cost was at around 17,000, but it's gone up even more since then. Of course, I'm aware of the fact that Americans also get a lot in return for their tuition money. I actually talked about how crazy American college campuses are in one of my very first videos on this channel. But if fewer amenities here and there could possibly lead to lower tuition prices, maybe not every college campus needs to be like an all-inclusive resort. Again, I'm sure that it would be extremely complicated to change the system from where it's at now, but I don't think that access to education should be determined by how much money your family has. And I haven't even touched on the whole public school funding issue, but if you're interested in that and in a more thorough comparison of the German and American school systems, make sure to check out these videos. The next thing I would change about the US, and especially about American cities, is that I would add a whole lot of public transportation and make everything a little less car-centric and more walkable and bike-friendly. Because that's definitely something I miss here, to just take my bike to places or walk to the grocery store. Even if you wanted to, most cities here aren't really made for that. When my brother and his girlfriend visited us last year and decided to walk to the grocery store, they experienced firsthand how uncommon this is here.
We were alone
Yeah,
on the sidewalk. And we were like, are we doing this right?
Yeah, we a little bit felt like aliens.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
A little bit. We actually got honked at one time.
Yeah.
I've also heard from people that cars would actually slow down and ask if they needed help just because they were walking on the sidewalk. Of course, some American cities are a lot better about that, like New York, for example, Boston, Chicago, but your average American city isn't really designed for pedestrians or cyclists. Here in Cincinnati, you barely see any bike lanes. You don't really see bike racks in front of buildings, which in Germany is completely normal. And those few people who do take their bikes through the city have a pretty high chance of getting in an accident because drivers here aren't really used to cyclists on the roads. And considering how few cyclists there are, the amount of accidents involving bikes and cars here is actually really high, and some of them are even fatal. And just like most American cities, Cincinnati doesn't really have a public transportation system either. I mean, there are buses running through the city, but if you need to switch lines, you usually have to go all the way downtown to the central bus station to get onto another line. And when I used to take the bus here, back when I first moved here, my American friends always asked if it wasn't like a really sketchy and dangerous experience. A lot of the locals here have never been on the bus themselves, and many look at it as something that's only for people who can't afford a car, which was a completely foreign idea to me at first. What's crazy is that Cincinnati actually used to have an amazing public transportation system back in the 19th and early 20th century, with streetcars and funiculars going up all the hills here, but then the car industry ended up taking over and eventually all of that disappeared. There's even a partially completed subway system from the early 20th century that the city never finished. The tunnels still exist to this day. Generally, I think the plans for more public transportation are technically there. In 2016, right around the time that I came to Cincinnati, the city had actually just finished a new streetcar system that was supposed to reference the old days, but the streetcar kind of just connects downtown with downtown and isn't really used a whole lot. I mean, you can take it if you want to avoid walking a couple blocks, but it doesn't really help you go a longer distance. It doesn't connect different parts of the city. Now, this is just Cincinnati, of course, but in most mid-sized American cities, it doesn't really look a whole lot better than here, which kind of results in a cycle. On the one hand, you have to drive everywhere in the US because everything here is designed for cars and you don't really have any alternatives, but because everyone takes their cars everywhere, new concepts for public transportation aren't really embraced a whole lot, and the country is becoming even more car-centric. So it's an endless cycle that, if I were the queen of the US, I would at least try to break up. Point number 4. Gun laws. I'm not gonna go too much into detail here because I know how sensitive of a topic this is, but I'd be lying if I said that this isn't on my list of things that I'd like to change. And if you clicked on this video, I'm assuming you're interested in how people from other countries perceive the US and what stands out to us. And if I'm being completely honest with you, I didn't expect gun violence to play as big of a role in my life here as it does. Like, before I came to the US, I knew about mass shootings, of course, and how present guns are here, but I kind of assumed that it's not actually going to be as intense as it appears in the media. Because the media obviously doesn't report about every time that there wasn't a shooting, right? You only get all the bad news summarized, which can lead to people having a slightly distorted idea of reality. In communication studies, this is also referred to as cultivation theory, and part of that is that people who watch a lot of TV often assume that the crime rate around them is a lot higher than it actually is because they're exposed to a lot of crime and violence in the news, but also in movies and TV shows, etc. And knowing that, I actually went in with the assumption that it's not nearly going to be as bad as it appears in the media. That as long as I don't surround myself with the wrong people, gun violence won't really play a role in my everyday life here. Well, 7 years later, I can say that I was wrong. Now, it's not like I've been shot before or anything like that, but even within the first few weeks that I was here, there was an active shooter alert on campus where we all had to take shelter and wait for update text messages from the university. Then also within the first few weeks, the roommate of the guy I was dating at the time got robbed at gunpoint in his pizza delivery car and had to drive to an ATM with a gun to his head to withdraw all of his cash. We'd regularly hear gunshots outside, and some of my American friends would be like, fireworks or gunshots? And they were usually able to tell the difference. Now, if you're from the US, you're probably thinking, yeah, whatever. You're in Cincinnati. That's not exactly a safe city. I mean, what did you expect? And I see where you're coming from, but you have to understand that as someone who grew up in Germany, or really any other developed country, I had never experienced any of that before. I'd never even heard a gunshot before, I don't think, or at least not that I was aware of. I'd never really seen a gun except on police officers and maybe like a hunting rifle here and there. I remember one time there was someone with a gun on a street in Munich, and I think he was like shooting into the air, and the whole city pretty much shut down. I worked at a radio station at the time, and it was a huge deal, and I don't even think anyone got hurt. And then when Munich was hit with a mass shooting at the mall back in 2016, literally everything shut down immediately. All the subways stopped going, everyone in Munich was advised to stay inside. I mean, it was international news.
Some of you are aware there were shootings in Germany, and we don't yet know exactly what's happening there, but obviously our hearts go out to those who may have been injured. It's still an active situation. Germany is one of our closest allies, so we are going to pledge all the support that they may need in dealing with these circumstances.
And of course, it was a terrible thing to happen, but this shows you how uncommon gun violence is in Germany. I don't know a single person there who's ever been shot. That simply doesn't play a role in everyday life there. Meanwhile, here, gun violence happens every day. A few weeks ago, a 2-year-old child was shot and killed here in Cincinnati, and then the next day, a 14-year-old teenager was fatally shot on the open street while getting out of the school bus. Even after 7 years, that's still absolutely dystopian to me. But most gun violence doesn't even really get talked about. I mean, those stories weren't the most recent ones that happened. I just remember that that was talked about more than most other incidences, but most shootings aren't even big news here. I mean, they usually get reported in the local news, but it's kind of like the local police reports in German newspapers where it says, an 80-year-old lady in Hinterduxingen fell for a phone scam, but luckily she called the police and was able to get her 200 euros back. Except here, it'll be someone was shot here, someone was shot there, but it was just between people who knew each other, so there's no threat to the public. And I noticed how this has affected me over time. Like when I first came here and my roommates told me that I couldn't walk 5 minutes home from campus at 6:30 p.m. because it was already dark in November, I was like, it's okay, I'm a big girl, I even got pepper spray, I am not Ubering home for a 5-minute walk. That's ridiculous. Now, I kind of understand where they were coming from. I wouldn't really go outside by myself after dark here anymore, even though I totally do that in Germany. And I even caught myself on Valentine's Day when Ben and I were in the movie theater and we were sitting kind of close to the door that I was thinking, what if someone is really frustrated today and comes in with a gun to shoot all the couples on their dates? Like I was constantly looking at the door and was already thinking about where I would hide. Yep, I'm starting to get paranoid in certain situations. Guess I'm slowly becoming Americanized.
If you're an American currently living abroad, what is one time that made you realize that America really messed you up?
Any loud sudden noise. A car backfiring. A broom going thwap. I will duck, I will hide, I will look for the exit. My body thinks that is a gunshot.
What I'm trying to say is, this isn't normal in other countries, and it doesn't have to be normal. It shouldn't be normal, in my opinion. And when I look at the US as a whole, it just doesn't seem to make sense that the country is doing so well in so many areas, yet so poorly in others. Now, as I said, this video isn't going to be about policy suggestions. I don't know for sure how the situation could be improved in the US, but something has to change. And I would probably start by making sure that the laws about getting a gun are a lot stricter and that there are regulations about how guns should be kept at home. Because humans are emotional creatures. We get in fights, we get mad, sometimes we act in the heat of the moment, sometimes we do things we regret later, sometimes we're not cautious enough and cause accidents. And having a weapon around you in those moments that can kill someone within seconds is not the smartest idea. And to end on a more casual note, one thing that I definitely change about the US for my own sake is that I would bring some better bread and dairy products to this country. Coming from Germany, the country of bread, I just still can't really get used to the fact that most of the bread here is what we'd call toast bread, and even the stuff that looks more like a nice crusty loaf of bread is usually way too soft. And why is the bread always so sweet here? It's supposed to be savory. Stop putting sugar in your bread. Now, I already know there will be comments saying, well, you're just not looking in the right places. You can definitely find good bread in the US. And that's great, but if you move to a city with no American food whatsoever, and then there's one single restaurant all the way across town that has American burgers and wings, and I said to you, what do you mean there's no American food? They have a cheeseburger at that one restaurant. It's just not really the same, right? And I know that the situation is a lot better in places on the East Coast and some of the major cities, but you know what? I don't live on the East Coast, and the majority of the US is actually more comparable to how the situation is here. So in my ideal world, the bread you get at the restaurants would actually taste good here. You could get good bread rolls, bread loaves, and pretzels at every grocery store for cheap, and they would have pre-made bread roll sandwiches in all of the corner bakeries, which we'd also need to bring here first. But hey, even if I could get that at Starbucks, I'd be happy. And then for some reason, I also feel like dairy products are just a lot better in Germany and other European countries than they are here. That includes things like yogurt, Quark doesn't even exist here, neither does crème fraîche, butter, so much better in Germany, like a good piece of bread with good butter. That's all you need, really. But also cheese is just not it here, especially mozzarella. That's the hill I'm gonna die on, but why can't I just get decent fluffy mozzarella in this country? That stuff costs €1 in Germany, and here I'll pay over $12 and it'll still taste like rubber. Even the vegan mozzarella in Germany tastes better than that. Cream cheese too. You guys need a lot more options here for herbal cream cheeses. The selection here is tiny compared to Germany. So that's definitely something I would change. If you had the power to do so, what would you change about the US or the country you live in? Let me know in the comments below, and please remember to stay respectful. These were just my personal opinions, but of course everyone has a different opinion. That's how it should be, and I would love to hear yours in the comments below. If you want to find out what I would change about Germany if I could, just click here. And if you watch my videos regularly but still haven't subscribed, I'd say it's about time. It's completely free, and if you activate the notification bell, you'll even get notified whenever I upload a new video. This is where you can find me outside of YouTube, and with that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time. Tschüss!